Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a profoundly emotional and honestly deeply philosophical journey. It's all based on a piece of source text with a pretty heavy title, worthless.docx. Now, on the surface, sure, it reads like a deeply personal poem, but as we break it down together today, you're going to see it's actually this highly structured map of the human psyche. It literally charts a course from the absolute depths of despair. We're talking complete dissolution of the self, all the way back up to this brilliant, life-affirming self-discovery. So let's just dive right into this, because the way this author structures their own emotional resurrection, it's something I think we can all really learn from.
Listen to the raw power of this opening. Since I remember, I was without worth, no strength, no self-preservation. I mean, wow, it just plunges us right into the absolute bleakest edge of the narrator's existential crisis. Imagine starting your story not just at rock bottom, but from a place when you literally don't even have the instinct to protect yourself. So the central question for our explainer today really boils down to this. How on earth does someone come back from that? How do you build a self when you feel like you've got absolutely zero foundation to stand on? All right, that brings us to Section 1, the Tunnel of Doubt. To really understand the recovery, we first have to map out the crisis itself. The narrator talks about what they call their doubting years, and they describe just moving blindly through life. Time is relentlessly ticking by, and all they can see is this narrow tunnel, while life itself looms over them like this totally impassable mountain. It's this crushing feeling of the sheer weight of existence. And that brings us to this line, which perfectly captures that ultimate loss of identity. I struggle to find my precious face. It's such a heavy, somber realization, because when you're stuck in that kind of tunnel, you don't just lose sight of the world around you. You lose sight of yourself. The narrator isn't just feeling sad here. They are experiencing a total loss of self-recognition. So what we're talking about here is essentially ego death. It's a complete dissolution of the self. In the text, they mention having no rights without horizon, and really crucially, no newness to experience and no connection to cultivate. Think about that for a second. Without an identity to anchor you, there is just zero forward momentum. You literally cannot grow if you don't know what you are growing from. So life gets stripped down to this static, featureless tunnel. Moving on to Section 2, we're looking at losing roots and identity. So the problem isn't just that things are static. They are actively getting worse. The text walks us through this agonizing, sequential stripping away of whatever ties the author has left to the world. And what's actually kind of surprising here is just how methodical the narrator is about their own despair. They aren't just wallowing in it, they're cataloging it, step by step. First, the text explicitly states they gave away my identity. This was an active loss. Second, this inevitably leads to losing relations because of a loss of touch. I mean, it makes sense, right? You can't really connect with others when you've basically abandoned yourself. The author describes being without any stem or roots. And then finally, step 3, we hit the absolute void, having nothing to count on now and nothing to call my own. And this brings up a really fascinating paradox. Usually we think of letting go of ourselves as, becoming light and free. But here, when you give away your identity, you lose your intrinsic weight. Having no weight of your own just leaves this hollow, echoing emptiness. The source text makes this beautiful yet completely tragic observation. In this state, there is no future to bring tomorrow from my today. Life just becomes sheer misery. Time keeps moving, sure, but you aren't. You're trapped in a today that literally cannot generate a tomorrow. Well, this takes us into Section 3, the unbreakable core. But right here is where things start to shift. We've hit rock bottom, the absolute climax of the pain. The narrator has lost their worth, their identity, their future, the whole shebang. But this is exactly where we stumble upon the real elixir of self-acceptance, hidden right there in the middle of all the devastation. Listen to how the text maps out survival over time. The narrator says they are shattered once, twice, and 3. It's this repeated, agonizing breaking down of the self. But then comes the pivot, and this is the most vital mechanism of resilience in the entire piece. The author writes, every time a part of me died, brought in another part anew. So the shattering wasn't the end of the story. It was an excavation. The destruction actually made room for a completely newly generated self. And what exactly do they find at the bottom of that excavation? Well, despite the crushing emptiness and feeling like they completely don't belong, the narrator realizes they actually still have their core. They write so beautifully about this intrinsic light that remains. They say, bring out my space within me, just as it has me within me. It's this incredibly warm, powerful realization. The space inside you isn't just an empty void.
It's an anchor. It's a shelter. Which leads right into this totally triumphant, undeniable declaration: my worth resides in me. I love this part. This is the exact moment the narrator stops looking outside for their lost relations, or their lost rights, or that missing horizon, and instead they turn their gaze inward. It's a massive transition from seeking external validation to finally claiming absolute internal worth. The external world can strip away literally everything else, but it absolutely cannot touch that core. And that brings us to our final part, Section 4, Bridging the Opposites. So now that the narrator has actually found their internal worth, what happens to all those years of feeling completely worthless? Did they just pretend none of that ever happened? Actually, no, not at all. We're left with these two states. On one side, the worthy state, which is all about light, the core, those complementing forces. And on the other, without worth, the emptiness, the shattering, the total lack of belonging. The narrator doesn't reject the darkness. Instead, they accept both. They realize that whether worthy or worthless, these two extremes actually need each other. Think about it. You can't truly know the strength of your core unless you've actually survived the shattering. The light literally needs the darkness in order to be seen. And this brings us to a really unique, profound use of a specific word in the text. The author redefines the whole concept of relation. Now, earlier on, they talked about losing relations with others, right? But here, they declare that means to me, I am relation. The narrator realizes that their very existence is the connective tissue, the vital bridge between these two opposing states of being. They are the living link between the worthy and the worthless. Let's summarize this incredibly empowering final logic with 3 quick takeaways. First, the opposing sides, worth and worthlessness, absolutely need each other to exist. Second, one side is worthy, the other is without, and the narrator is the entity linking them together. And because these opposites must be linked to make any sense of the human experience, the third point becomes totally undeniable. The narrator's existence is required. As the author so boldly puts it, it shows that there is need in my presence. Their very presence is what gives meaning to the struggle. So this whole journey from worthless.doc isn't just some abstract poem. It's practically a blueprint for radical self-acceptance. It teaches us that our darkest, most shattered moments aren't evidence that we're worthless. Actually, scratch that. It's more like they're just half of an equation that desperately requires our living, breathing presence to balance out. So I want to leave you with this final thought today. When you look at the dialectic of your own life, how do you act as the relation linking the opposing forces of worth? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this journey through the text has given you a whole new framework for seeing your own intrinsic value.